So firstly, I want to believe that if you go to places where they have better technology implementation, it's like stepping into the future for a while, and then you have to come back to your reality in your present, and you see that we don't have that technology in our country. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for turning out in such great numbers. Good to see a lot of friends in the room as well. These are the dates for the upcoming FOF presentations. Please note them down so that you can plan your travel accordingly. And you'll get an email of who's going to speak next and what topic, etc. So this topic, I think you must have seen the email, the car as a smartphone. I don't think it's a very new concept, but what is happening is technology like automobile, which has been around for almost 100 years. So it's come at an intersection with not just manufacturing capacity, but also engineering new processes to make different kinds of cars. Also coming at the intersection of chips and semiconductors and softwares. So you're going to get buy one, get one free today. We have two speakers. It's not just me, but our resident auto analyst Rohil is also here, and he's going to give your perspective about the whole auto sector as well. In between, as we talk about what's happening with electric vehicles, what is China doing, and what technologically advanced cars we are going to see in the future. So firstly, I want to believe that if you go to places where they have better technology implementation, it's like stepping into the future for a while, and then you have to come back to your reality in your present, and you see that we don't have that technology in our country. And I'm not talking about some idle technology. It is actually far advanced vehicles, far advanced autonomous systems. In fact, if you go to California, if you go to some cities in the US, and if you also go to some cities in China where there are these autonomous vehicles driving, there is no driver in the driver's seat. And despite seeing any number of videos on YouTube, you still feel that that's an experience you have to have in person. And the moment you sit in the car, the first 2-3 seconds, you are extremely uncomfortable when there is no driver and the steering wheel conducts on its own and takes you to point A to point B. But after a few seconds, it becomes old. It becomes as old as sitting in an Uber when a human driver is driving you. So I want to believe that the future already has arrived, and we're just seeing different versions of it at different parts of the world. So before the iPhone launched, the smartphone market looked something like this, where you had some feature phones, when you had some touchscreen phones, when you had some bigger screen phones, when you had keyboards on the screen. But then there was a moment when the iPhone was launched, and after the iPhone was launched, the entire gamut of devices or smartphones that came afterwards was completely different. So once the system was known that there has to be a processor, there has to be a battery, there has to be a big screen, there can't be a keyboard, your finger is your stylus, and all those things that we saw, the App Store and the connectivity, the cloud, and all these things, once those things were obvious, you saw all the devices that came afterwards looking very similar. The designs might vary a little bit. You might see a little bit of bigger cameras somewhere. Someone might have smaller cameras, some have bigger screens, smaller screens, bigger batteries, thicker batteries, better modems, 4 SIMs, 5 SIMs, whatever you have. But the whole concept of the phone remained the same. It was a chassis with a battery, with a system on chip, the processor, which has all the graphics, the AI processor and everything, and the camera and the screen. And you can type on that screen and you can use the screen, take pictures. All the systems were the same eventually. And that's something I feel has happened in the automotive sector as well. There has been an iPhone moment for the car. And in opinion of many people on Twitter, including myself, I feel that moment in cars came when the Model S of Tesla was launched. And before this car was launched, of course, cars had infotainment screens. Of course, cars had better quality displays. Of course, cars had several gadgets inside of them, several sensors inside of them. But this particular car, the moment it came, it had an onboard computing unit and the entire processing of this vehicle happened in this onboard computing unit. They took away all the buttons, they put all the controls on the screen, which can you can debate whether it's good or bad, but the whole point is it's an onboard computer which controls the rest of the car, and whatever updates you want to do with the hardware, with the software, all you can do is send an over the air update and update the car to make it work differently or better in some way or the other. So this was, according to me, an iPhone moment for automotive vehicles. And if you see the trajectory of some of the Chinese EV companies picking up their pace in terms of launching new vehicles, it will coincide somewhere with this year, and you will see a lot of investments happening. It was just like a revelation. Imagine all the Android phones in the world which are non-iOS. Every other phone company that came out did basically the same thing. They copied the idea and they figured out a way to mass produce it, figured out a way to add features to it which otherwise will not be there in the other competing phones. And at one point in time, there were 800 smartphone companies in the world, including many in India as well. So it's quite an interesting time in the auto sector as well today, where we don't know where we are in the cycle, but the pattern of behavior is very similar. And I think this is the iPhone moment for the car. So I got a little curious just to see very, very broad numbers before Royal takes over from me for a few minutes. I just thought let's compare the global volumes of sales of the top brands versus some of the new brands at that time. So I compared Toyota's volumes, which has shown in the past 12 years a little bit of growth. On a CAGR basis, it's not that great, but still it's growth compared to what GM has done. The overall cars sold by GM has shrunk. The overall cars sold by VW has more or less been the same. And this is despite all the acquisitions of brands and everything that they have under the umbrella. You have Honda, which is also more or less similar. The slides will be shared, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. Then you have BYD. BYD already was an automobile manufacturer. They made plug-in hybrids and they had other vehicles as well, like along with the battery business that they ran. But they saw a huge jump in volume because that's when the cars that they were making started making sense to people, and the cost started making sense to people, and the whole wave of EVs picked up in this period of time. Geely, which is another large conglomerate which owns brands like Polestar, Volvo, and it has also several top brands in China as well. Even they saw growth. And Tesla, of course, we all know because they were the only Western company who was doing something very different and radically different from what the other Western or non-Chinese OEMs were doing. So, of course, Tesla, which had very small volumes at that time, it's not visible in the chart, but they had some volumes, has also become a large player since then. So I'll now invite Rohil for giving us a quick overview of what's happening in the auto space and also cover some of the basic metrics of these businesses as well.
So I'll largely go through a few data points where the revenues are, how the market cap is for both the ICE as well as a lot of the Chinese companies, listed today, how they're being valued. So we'll just have a look at some of those numbers. So I hope this is visible to most. Yeah. So in terms of revenues, you have the Volkswagen Group, which is obviously a lot of consolidated entities, a lot of brands that they have under that particular entity. So they're at about 350 $350,000 million. What I've tried to do in this chart is all the different color schemes. So I've tried to take the major automotive OEMs by country, just to see where each of the local players are. So red being all the American companies, the greens are the European companies. What's in purple, I've also taken the luxury automotive OEMs who haven't seen a lot of shift, nor have too many announced EV models so far. But just to see how their revenues have been, even though their volumes obviously are significantly lower than the others. Taking the Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, as well as the Indians, just to understand the overall broad numbers. So yeah, sorry, this is the revenue slide. Uh, yeah, so we're seeing a lot of the revenue share is still with the legacy automakers, but even at significantly lower automotive volumes, EV volumes that largely all the Chinese players are doing, because they're pure, most of them are pure EV companies, right? They're already at par or higher in terms of the revenue share compared to the legacy ICE manufacturers. Coming to the EBITDA margins, again, majority of them are in the range of 10 to 12%. The reason for taking EBITDA margins is every company is going through a different capex cycle, a different R&D cycle right now. So it's better to look at it from this perspective, at least to try and understand whether the EV manufacturers can they reach the kind of profitability that the ICE players are reaching. So all of these are FY24 numbers. Obviously, we'll see some sort of operating deleverage that is there for the ICE players as well because of the stagnant volumes, as Ronak spoke about earlier. So, but one of the interesting things to note is BYD is already significantly higher than a lot of the ICE players. Obviously, it's also because of how their overall they've insourced the entire battery manufacturing as well, and they're so these are consolidated numbers. It also includes the financial services revenue, but largely it's the automotive OEMs. Some of the EV manufacturers like Xpeng, Neo, they're still loss making, but that's okay because they're investing a lot today, and the scale is still very, very small. But it's the quality of products, as Ronak said, that really matter, which might be, you know, significantly superior than what the other automotive OEMs across the world are able to deliver today. Yeah, in terms of market capitalization, again, so I did not put Tesla onto this chart, otherwise it will get even more skewed. But most of them are in, again, so this is in $1 million. So most of them are in a very tight range. The Chinese are obviously getting a good, let's say, a good market capitalization. But what's interesting to see is most of the global players, right? They're largely ICE even today. Their share of electric vehicles is about 15%. And we can debate how good they are and the JVs that they have, how good their products in the electric side they will eventually be able to transition to, and whether the quality of the products will they be able to compete with these Chinese players or not. Uh, but yeah, even today, we'll see the valuation slide also later, and this is at significantly lower price earnings ratio for most of the automotive OEMs. But what's more important is the R&D investments that go into most of these companies today. The Chinese are significantly investing a lot more. They're at least about 5 to 10% of sales, whereas majority of the legacy OEMs are at roughly 5% of sales, and they're playing a catch up. So despite obviously, so one other factor to note is that they have as a scale, because of where ICE is, it's already much larger. So on an absolute basis, they may be investing a healthy amount, but they're also partially developing ICE vehicles or variants that they still have to sell today, be it hybrids. So they are more focused on various different technologies, and that's where 5% of their revenues are going, whereas the Chinese are purely investing, except for BYD, majorly they are investing only in the electric space, and still there as a percentage of their revenues, it's a at least about 5 to 10% of their revenues. Yeah, we also have to see whether these make economical sense at the end of the day. Is this business worth investing in? Does the business can the business generate a decent ROCE over a cycle, right? But I've taken static numbers here, so the FY24 numbers. Most of them are making barely enough to match the cost of equity in their respective countries. With the 10-year bond yields being somewhere close to 1.5 to 2%, depending on the geographies you take. they're making ROCEs of about 7%. So it's not an easy business. It clearly shows just how capital intensive and R&D intensive this business can be. And this is where the products are still very, very nascent. There's a lot of new technology still coming. Still they have to invest a lot in that. And at the same time, different powertrains, different battery options, etc. So largely 5 to 7% has been the ROCE profile for most of these companies. Yeah, and coming finally, before I give it back to Ronak, looking at the PE ratio as well, most of the global OEMs are trading at 5 times or 6 times price to earnings ratio. And yet, the kind of market capitalizations that we're seeing is uh, fairly similar to what the Chinese are at. We have seen, so Xiaomi obviously includes the the smartphone devices as well in their business since it's a consolidated number. But largely, even BYD is just over 20, and that's where some of the other players are trading today. Yeah, sorry, just one last slide. The number of models. So again, we saw the R&D numbers. This is just when you go to the product portfolio, right? It's largely 4 to 6 different EV models that they have today. They'll have variants of those models, yes, but it's just 4 to 6 different models. So so the development that will be required going forward is going to be a lot more. The variety that needs to be provided for the entire global automotive market is also going to be quite intensive. So as the pace of delivering new products, the time to market will also have to come down if the EV penetration really has to make a sharp jump. Uh, and that's where I think largely you are seeing that the Chinese have far more models in their portfolio, and some of these guys are startups, and still they have multiple platforms and multiple products in their portfolio. The Indian players also, M&M is two models, but they've just been launched. They're still not in the market. So the feedback that they get, most of the Chinese players have had some models in the on road to get feedback from that. So the data collection, the uh, ability to learn from the data that you're collecting, they've been ahead of the curve. So yeah, obviously there is a lot of catch up. I think Ronak will also touch upon that. So yeah, I'll just give it back to him. Thanks, Ronak.
I want you guys to even pay attention to the ROC pointing made and at the same time the number of products that they have. So between 2012, the iPhone moment for cars, and till today, it's interesting to know what has changed. And we know what has changed. I'm just trying to summarize some points now. So the more interesting things in the car, so if you look at the bill of materials of all the components that go inside an automobile, and this is one of my favorite images, Rohil knows that. The reason I look at this image again and again is every time you look at it from a different model, from a different company, uh, the average number is always the same. You know that what a seat costs, what a tire costs, what a wheel costs, what a brake costs, all these things are extremely optimized over the last hundreds of years of auto ancillary engagements, and we know exactly what it costs. The biggest cost for most of these products is the engine and the drivetrain, the transmission system that they use, and those are endlessly iterated over long periods of times to what auto nerds call the refinement of the vehicle. So if you think that the car is refined because they have put some effort in making sure that the engine works well, there is less noise, it has naturally aspirated engine or a turbo engine or whatever. So that has been the biggest item of expense, not just in terms of the operating expense, but also in terms of the R&D that goes into. Of course, in designing new cars, R&D is of course required for other components as well, and it's a constant improvement. But most of the R&D also gets diffused to the auto ancillary companies. So a Bosch will do its own R&D, a Continental will do its own R&D, a Bristol will do their own R&D. It all comes together as part of the bill of materials for the car that is sold. The main part that has changed today when you look at EVs is the source that drives the wheels. So you no longer have to rely on this technology of engines, which has been nursed for a long period of time by all these auto companies, and you're now coming to electric motor, which essentially has been around for even 100 years. And you optimize that electric motor by connecting it to a battery, by making sure you provide the right voltage, and you get a torque which is probably equal or better than most of the ICE or combustion vehicles around. So this is a major change that has propelled anybody in the world to suddenly start a automobile company. And I want to take an example of a company that I got a chance to see when I went to China, and it's very interesting. But before that, I want to highlight the main reason again that why I personally think that a car has now become synonymous to a smartphone is because of this onboard unit. This is the Tesla Model Plaid, which has the yoke steering. Again, no buttons you will find in this car. You just have this onboard screen, which is the control system for your user interface for your onboard computer, and all the sensors, everything talks to the computer inside, which has a motherboard inside, and everything that a computer or a smartphone would do, this device, this car is capable of doing on this screen. Before that, can you even imagine 350 brands of any product? Any product. I couldn't. I had to recheck this number. This number actually is quite high. It's much higher number than this, but this is like when you filter out all the common sub brands, you have 350 brands. At one point in time, China had 350 brands of cars. And it is now, as of October 2024, has filtered down to 57 serious contenders who have survived and have managed to scale. So the list that Rohil showed are even the cream of that 57. And to be very fair, I don't want to bore you with the brands and what they do, where they come from. You just have to watch this 2-hour long video. This was a recent Guangzhou auto show where, I don't know, this Inside China Auto is a guy who is so passionate about Chinese EVs. He lives in China. He talks about these EVs. They have a blog which talks endlessly about this. He actually did a 2-hour walkthrough. You can watch it at 1.5x and keep the audio on mute and just watch him walk through the entire pavilion after pavilion after pavilion, looking at so many cars, so many different brands. Even the Western brands are there, even the domestic brands. All these brands, if he just goes into these cars, sits in those cars and describes what he feels these new models are going to be. And these are production ready models. These are not concept models. These are all models which are launched and will be on the streets, are actually now on the streets. At that time, they were going to be launched. It's a fantastic video to get a walkthrough of those 57 brands who have actually challenged the entire perception of how cars should run. I just want to highlight the same blogs numbers. Every month they come out with this number. It's publicly available. It's nothing proprietary. But if you see the top 3 brands which are selling in China, is a government company, SAIC, founded in 1950s. BYD, a erstwhile battery maker who is now probably close to the going to be largest EV maker in the world. And Geely Group, which is an umbrella company which has a lot of sub brands underneath it, which have different price points. So one from luxury EV to mid-range EV to mass market and lower mass market EVs also. But interesting to see, when you see in China, when they describe this number, they call it as a new energy vehicle, NEV. What that also includes is a plug-in hybrid. In India, we don't have this concept of plug-in hybrid, but rest of the world where hybrids are common, plug-in hybrid is a very important category where the battery can also be charged with a electric connection, and you have the ICE version also, ICE engine also in the car. So you have a combination of electric as well as petrol, diesel, whatever you want. So plug-in hybrids, because of that, the number looks very high. But irrespective of that, if you even see BYD, just the battery electric vehicle, the BEV, is still the number 1 manufacturer. It made in the month of November, 2 lakh cars were sold by just one company, BYD. So the China market is huge. So they have some 3 crore annual sales of cars, and they have a manufacturing capacity of 6 crores. So imagine the kind of capacity they have created in the past 12 years since the first Model S was launched. And this 6 crores also, of course, includes the ICE engines. 20% of that 6 crores, I think, is close to the EV capacity today, and expanding very rapidly, as some of the brands that Rohil mentioned are also now figuring out efficiencies of scale. So again, I said Geely is the number 2. Interestingly, Tesla Motors also sells quite well in China, despite not having some of the software features that are enjoyed by rest of the customers globally. This is also a very strong contender in many of the urban cities. But if you just see a list of top OEMs, and why we look at China, the China market is so huge, it actually gives a lot of sample size for us to think about companies. If you take India as a market, India only sells 40 lakh cars a year. Yeah, total. And 1 lakh was the 2024 number of EVs that we sold. So it's a very tiny market, even for rest of the world to take seriously today. But it's a growing market for us. But interestingly, despite this, China has seen growth, despite all the numbers of 3 crore cars being sold. Of course, the ICE numbers are shrinking rapidly, and that is affecting a lot of these old school Western brands as well. But interestingly, if you see top OEMs in China, most of them are local companies who have come up in the last 10, 12 years in terms of manufacturing capacity. Although the enterprises might be older, they might have an older history of operation. But because of the advent of EV brands or EV cars in that portfolio, they have seen a lot of growth over the past year or so. I'm just illustrating a latest number that is publicly available. And you can also track on this website. Every month they publish the broad numbers just to be aware of what's happening with different brands and what they're doing. But the most interesting thing I really enjoyed is a smartphone company going into and making a car. And this is something that was shared on Twitter by a user. Mostly, I would have imagined somebody who has a car might put a Porsche sticker on that car to make it feel like a Porsche in their mind. I've seen Porsche stickers at auto rickshaws also. So it's actually okay to put a Porsche sticker somewhere. But to put a Xiaomi sticker on a Porsche was very, very unique. I never thought somebody would put a Xiaomi sticker on this car, because the car that they launched looks very similar to the Porsche, which is the 911 Carrera, which you're seeing in the photo. And it's a looker. I mean, they really went all in terms of putting the designs, putting the philosophy of Italian cars, and bringing it into a electric vehicle built from ground up. Again, it's a company that makes smartphones. I had to remind myself every time I saw this vehicle, every time I sat in this vehicle, the interior quality and everything seems so rich. And this is the version of the car which is not even the most premium version. This is, if you net it into INR terms, it might come at about 35, 36 lakh rupees. And it easily feels like a luxury experience which you would experience in a sports car anywhere else in the world. And the founder of Xiaomi had this liking towards Italian cars, so they called this platform as Moderna to pay homage to the Italians and their design principles and how they inspired everyone to make better looking vehicles. But that is not even the most interesting part. Although they built everything, they hired the right people, they put money in R&D, they created the entire platform, they formed JVs with the battery companies to keep on iterating on how this battery should fit underneath the vehicle. They engineered the braking system. Every single part of this car has been re-engineered or innovated in a way which fits the way that they want to make this car operate. But the heart of this car, again, they put in the money, they designed or innovated on the electric motor, filed their own patents, and now they have a unique way of running a sports car. This car, the model which I'm showing right now, this engine can go from 0 to 100 in 2.8 seconds. This car is costing $1 lakh, which they sell. It's called the Xiaomi SU7 Pro. And we also got a chance to take a test ride in it, and your stomach sticks to your spine at that acceleration. It is nuts. You cannot imagine how fast a car can accelerate. And this car does that in 0 to 100 in 2.8 seconds. Now you wonder, why would you require the acceleration of that kind? Who cares? The whole point is that they were capable of building this despite being a mobile phone company. And they also sell washing machines, by the way. Now, of course, you want to ask all these questions. Once you see it in front of you, of course, you have seen so many YouTube videos, you have seen so many spec sheets, you have seen all the photos from different angles. Car reviewers have gone inside the car, under the car, over the car, just to show you everything how the car looks like. But the moment you touch it, you realize, okay, this is something different. And why are more people not doing this? Now, which is the obvious question everybody would have. I also had this question. And the answer was very straightforward. We have already seen this happen. And you know where this presentation is going. There's a title also. We have seen this happen in the smartphone ecosystem as well, where they made bigger smartphones, they made better smartphones. In fact, the entire growth of the Android ecosystem was on the back of Chinese phone manufacturers. If the Android ecosystem was not opened up to other players, there would have been a huge issue in terms of which third operating system might come. And there were 8 9 operating systems out there before Android and iOS became the de facto platform for smartphones today. Samsung had their own platform. There was an old platform called Symbian, which was people who used smartphones earlier. They had those clunky phones, and Sony had one of the implementation. Nokia had implemented on Symbian. So really clunky phones, no app stores. But once this platform, the Android platform and the iOS platform scaled, all the smartphones took over in terms of use case. So we'll just go one by one as to why it has also worked in the case of cars as well. And Xiaomi, mind you, does not sell a lot of cars. Of course, it's a luxury car, it's a sports car, it's not a general use case car, it's for hobbyists, but still it sells. It started selling in May 2024. Royal, is that right? Yeah. Yeah. So from May 2024, every month they have been selling 20,000, 30,000 cars, and mostly in China at the moment. So, like I said earlier, there is no sunk cost for some of these companies. So, you want to build a motor, an engine for the car, you don't need to go back to Modena and see what Lamborghini did or what Ferrari did and their ICE engines. Let's reinvent, let's throw the entire rule book out of the table, build a motor from scratch, let's see where it goes. Then you hire the right people, build the right team, and you realize, okay, there is a value chain locally available in China because of their legacy of manufacturing over the past 30 years. And they have built all of these components bit by bit on China. Of course, learning from the West. One might also argue that people would have copied ideas from the West wherever ideas were easily available or could have been also borrowed. But if you see today, the entire EV, and this is again an illustrative example. Somebody had put up this chart, so I thought it was useful to see everything in one place. But you can see right from processing of the battery chemicals, bulk of the capacity of battery processing happens in China. So there is no escape. You want to build a brand anywhere in the world, you have to go to Chinese battery intermediaries who are selling you the chemicals to make a battery. Your EV battery ecosystem also is there. So bulk of the batteries are made in China. One can argue it's a economies of scale, but it's also innovation on that scale. It's not just idle economies of scale. So all the technologies we use in India today were thanks to the innovations and bringing the cost down of the lithium phosphate batteries, the LFP batteries, that happened only in China, did not happen anywhere else in the world. The technology was known for decades, but nobody had commercialized the production process to make it more and more efficient. So that happened in China, but it still happens in China. You have all the battery components, ancillaries also working there. So not just the smaller chips, but even the less important chips in the car, which are not less important, less valuable chips in the car. They're also made in China today. And you can see some familiar names, some Japanese, some Germans over here, along with the Chinese local subsidiaries of these companies. Then, of course, you have the EV makers, which is a visible front of all this entire ecosystem, where if the car is on the road, if customers are buying it, it's a sign of success, and the car survives for a long cycle, then it's a great product to own as well. And then we will see over a period of time how these newer brands survive. And along with that, there are traditional automakers who are learning from these EV players as to how to make the ICE car also appealing. Because not always people want to have a use case of a EV. That's also an interesting anecdote I want to add later on. And there's also a cycle of recycling, which I don't think anywhere in the world we have seen at scale. But there is a cycle of products which is now going into recycling. They have figured out a way to efficiently recycle batteries so that these batteries can have a longer life somewhere else in some other form, maybe in public transport or some other areas where it's not too critical in terms of giving you the right range. And then there is the entire charging infrastructure, where not just manufacturing for any standards within China, they have standardized the entire charging infra in China for themselves, but even globally, if anybody wants to scale charging infrastructure in any country, in any city, there is no escape but to come to one of these players who have already figured out a way to sell it to you at the right price. So it's a very interesting ecosystem. Imagine having the entire ecosystem in your country, no tariffs, no janjat, just get a bill of material order from someone, you compare them with the rest of the competition, and you go and start manufacturing. It sounds simple, but actually it is that simple in many cases. One thing which you should not ignore, and this is again something that happened with the smartphone companies as well, most of the people went very hard. So, for example, if you look at Apple, and there's a nice reference I will give you, which you can track how Apple innovated the hardware side of the device. If you see what Apple did, they went right into the bare bones. They said, we will just take the architecture of the processor and we'll make our own microprocessor. We'll make our own chip. And that chip will give us enough autonomy to do whatever we want in terms of controlling the power consumption, how much battery we require, how much RAM we require. And they have been the benchmark for the longest period of time. They proved it in phones. They proved it now, a few years later, after they phased out Intel in their MacBooks. And you can see nobody, even today, has come closer to creating a product which is of a similar equivalent battery capacity and power consumption capacity, which MacBooks have done so far. I'm an Apple fan, you can clearly make it out. But the whole point is, on the software side, most companies struggled a lot. So Android gave that base to many companies where they realized that we cannot compete with companies like Apple in creating the software which runs the phone. So Android became the default license for most people to install on their products, and they started selling Android phones on top of that. So whatever hardware improvements you made based on your R&D, economies of scale, etc., were always balancing with what the operating system could do. You did not have full control as to what the device can do. But yet, that same thing is no longer happening with cars, and they have learned the hard way when it comes to platforms. So this is again an example of a company you visited. I won't name it, but interestingly, they were showcasing this device. This is eventually going to go into some car as an infotainment system, and of course, it looks like a giant widescreen TV monitor. But this is the size of your car infotainment system, going from the passenger side to the driver's side. So these are basically three 4K screens over here, and this is the driver's instrument cluster, which shows the gear or whatever, the drive mode and the speedometer and other metrics that they want to see. This is the infotainment unit where it can show navigation and other apps that you can control. And this is the passenger side where the passenger can while away their time and don't disturb the driver. So while describing the specs sheet of this, and this is a chip that Chinese people have manufactured on their own, competing in specs with your Nvidia's topmost auto chip or with Qualcomm's topmost auto chip. And they were telling that if you start PlayStation or the app of PlayStation, this is why is this app there? He said you can play a video game, a AAA game which you can play on a PS5, you can play on this device on that screen. And one would wonder, why would you want so much computing power? This is it's possible to give that much power today. And once you wonder, okay, this is fine, but what is the cost of this particular product? So it says right from the hardware to the implementation, the one-time implementation and the licensing of some of the softwares that they have, it costs about $1,000 per unit. And one would have no benchmark as to what this $1,000 means. So why is it an important number? Because Nvidia sells it at 3x the price. Qualcomm sells it 2.5x the price with their licensing and global coverage and everything. So one would wonder, of course, Nvidia is a bigger company, Qualcomm is a bigger company, they're selling it. But they also have the capability of creating this product. It may not be all the cars today, but if somebody wants to launch a car with even an older version of the same microprocessor, same chip, they can launch it. $1,000 is nothing in the overall bill of materials of the car. The point is, this capability available now, the people have figured out it's no longer just about the hardware, it's also about the software. So they have gone deep into creating their own operating systems as well. And this company also is owned by, again, interesting thing in China is everybody owns everybody's stake a little bit. So this is owned by a large auto conglomerate over there. It's very interesting to see how they're creating this ecosystem of software and hardware R&D as well. And this is not just in one car. This is just a company who makes the chips. But there are companies we saw who also have internal teams who do R&D and design their own chips, which they will eventually create computing products to this company also. So we don't know where the ecosystem is going, but the capabilities required to build a chip and to create a software system competing with other companies is there in China today. The whole idea behind the phone's microprocessor, the chip, was to have one chip that will rule all your devices. So with Android, the top end Androids go with usually Snapdragon chip from Qualcomm, and of course Apple has its own chip, so there is no competition in the iOS ecosystem. But the whole idea was to create a one system on chip which will have its own GPU on board, which will have its own neural processing engine which does the AI work for you, and all the other RAM and everything in that small system. And you then pair it with the best software, and every time you get the same experience or a smooth experience as you go along. But if you know, in the mobile phones, that maturity has happened a while back, when no matter how much you upgrade your phone to a newer version, you're not getting visible benefits to speed or computing power or latency that you see. You can take photos with a 3-year-old phone which look as good as something that you take today also. Because now the curve of technology improvement has slowed down in terms of smartphones. But that's not the case with cars today. Cars are actually maturing, going in the growth phase right now. It will mature over a period of time. But interestingly, again, this is a slide deck uh, of Qualcomm from 3 years ago. It's not even new. But they call something called as digital chassis, where they say that, okay, you will need chips in your car for doing some of the other work. Most importantly, you will need a cockpit controller, which we saw the controlling the infotainment and the onboard computing unit. You will need something for the car to connect to other cars and the sensors on there. So you have connectivity chips. You have chips that will control the ADAS unit, which will give you autonomous driving capability. You can have lane assist, you can have lane departure warnings, you can have your cruise control and adaptive cruise control also. Based on the speed changing in the traffic, the cruise control takes care of itself, and autonomous braking and all those things. And you will have lastly connected car tech, which will basically update everything over the cloud, give it better features in the hardware over the cloud. So all these chips are provided by Qualcomm, and they call it digital chassis. They say that you will all these chips will be going on with various sensors in the car, and you will have this connected car experience. And they have been delivering some part of the other version of these chips for the longest period of time. So what we are seeing today, the so-called monopoly of some of the Western companies in their IPs for selling these cars. I'm not saying the IPs are being broken or stolen, but mostly people have created competing products with their own IPs now, which are available in Chinese cars. And that hasn't happened for free. Now it happens when you are willing to partner with all the companies who are selling these products globally. So you will see various companies in their specifications mention a lot of these names of chips that they are implementing. So if the car is very, very expensive, or it's a premium car in the brand, they will get all the best chips in the market, like Nvidia's or Qualcomm's. If the car is somewhere in the mid range, they will get some other manufacturer's chips. So depending on the price range, their bill of material also evolves, and that is a very interesting thing, which of course we have seen already happen in your auto ancillaries, also already seen happening in smartphones also, where with the ICE vehicles you will get slightly lesser features in the car as compared to what you get. But here, once the onboard computer is kept, today it has to do a lot more than it was supposed to be designed to do. So today, as people are expecting more autonomous features built into the car, they will want these chips to be more and more powerful over a period of time. We don't know where the trajectory is going. We will see how it evolves over a period of time. But I think the ecosystem of partnering with everyone has also been very strong in China, and rest of the world also is doing it. So if you see many of the new product launches of the ICE companies, old ICE companies launching EVs, you'll also see some of these names in their slide decks as to they are partnering with whoever working on. But you don't see models on the street. The real test is to actually have cars on the street. Like Royal said, the more you test, the more you iterate, and the more you learn. Of course, in smartphones, people have lost the battle for creating a competing platform. But the operating system of the car is still an open ocean. Anybody can put their boat in and they can float and see how far it goes. So Xiaomi, of course, has the advantage of the Xiaomi OS, which they have on their smartphones, and their visual is something very different. I will show you in a slide deck, a slide after this. But they have basically decided to control the entire operating system experience right from ground up, just like they have for their phones. And they build their own chips. They build everything on their own, and they say we will want to control everything in this vehicle that way. And what interestingly they did was they also created modularity of hardware accessories you can put in. So you see these connectors, you can actually add accessories to it which have different functionalities which nobody else provides. Now this is a very differentiated way of selling a car or product, and the accessories also are not very expensive. So if you want to accessorize your Porsche, the accessory will cost probably equal to a small car. But here the accessories are costing $100, $200 here and there. You can just add a little bit for a car which anyway costs $3,600, $30,000, $100,000, depending on that range. So it's not a huge expense for a person who can afford to buy this car. And these are all cute accessories. If you see accessories over here, like you can attach different kinds of lights, different kinds. So the ambient lights in the car can be powered through this. We can have different kinds of smartphone handles. We can have different kinds of picnic equipment or trekking equipment you can attach to it. You can have GPS loggers. You can have even things like walkie-talkies. You can have a convoy of Xiaomi cars, like how most Harley Davidson riders go. They have a convoy of bikers who are connected on the radio. You can connect all the cars. But they have gone one step further because they're Xiaomi. And if you go to a Xiaomi store in China, I don't know if it is the same experience elsewhere in the world, but You go into the store, the first area you see is the laptops, phones, and tablets that they have. Little bit further you walk, you start seeing hair dryers, your vacuum cleaners, their robot vacuum cleaners, or some lighting equipment that they have. A little bit further, you go start seeing washing machines and other appliances which people are putting in their homes, like larger, bulky appliances and speakers and everything, the hi-fi systems, the TVs, and suddenly you go see a car. So the entire store, right from one door to the other door, is like the entire product range of Xiaomi that they're selling, and they want to create this connected experience that you can control everything from your phone, from your car, wherever you are. You can have all the connected devices. So they had this demo room set up just to show all the electronic gadgets over here, Xiaomi gadgets. And they were showing that you can control every single aspect of this, automate this, you can set up routines. And lucky for us, we also met a person who's a Xiaomi super user who was the 16th user to get the car when they launched the car. And he has this setup in his life that when he leaves from office, he stays 20 minutes away from office, he turns on the routine, the automation routine, and it sets the temperature in his house, starts the washing machine, some random stuff. So he's selling all these things can be done from the driver's seat when he starts from the office, or automated by geofencing it as well. So it's all fancy software stuff which they can do because they control the entire hardware and software experience and the accessory experience that the users are going to get. And which is a very interesting departure from providing a user experience of selling a car. Another great experience which I witnessed personally is generally people wonder, and this is also in China, people I think they have become a little bit first world and they have first world problems now. So despite having so many versions of charging technologies, like the slowest charging to the fastest charging, which is like 3x faster than what we have as fast charging in India, even that people have a chance of complaining this is not fast enough. So a company called Neo, which Royal mentioned as a dot in the presentation earlier, we don't know what will happen to Neo, but the interesting thing is they have these battery swapping stations. And a car which has to swap its battery, it has to just park next to it and go into the battery swapping mode. And the car's computer takes over the car. It parks it in the right bay inside this small shop like thing. And it goes onto that thing, and the floor goes off, and a battery robot comes out. It removes the old battery, takes out that battery, and replaces the other battery. And one would assume it will take 15-20 minutes to do that. It takes 3 minutes flat. We stood there, took a 3-minute video, and the driver was sitting with his hands folded, playing some music or whatever, talking to somebody inside the car, the passenger. They're sitting as if they're in the petrol pump, and the battery was swapped, and the car drove out. And even after the battery swapping is done, the control is not given to you. The car starts and comes out, and then the control is given to the driver, and the driver drove off. And he was happy that we were filming him. Maybe he felt popular that some Indians are standing there with cameras, but it actually was interesting to see that this technology exists and it is at scale. It is not something where you can see only in 1 or 2 places. It's in many major cities. They have these shopping stations, little bit off-road or near the malls where there is parking lots available. And this is not the only player who is setting it up. That is the beauty of it. Many players who have realized that, okay, we can differentiate the user experience in some way, provided by doing this. The best way, like I said, is to iterate. Like Rohil also mentioned, you have to iterate by putting the car out there, build it yourself. Of course, you will have ancillaries later on. You will obviously have to hire them to increase your gross margins over a period of time. But at this point in time, most of these companies are really focused on just having these cars on the road. And when I say most of the companies, I'm saying the startups in China, they're focusing on this part to survive with some product and a market fit and let the other players evaporate from 350 to 57. 57 to 10, we don't know when it will happen, but it can happen. So everybody's vying for the top 10 spot of EVs to be sold in China. And EVs, because EVs is where the competition is the greatest today, because everybody can do the same things that we saw earlier. And when you build it yourself, you learn a lot of things where you can optimize, want to do yourself. Like I said, Xiaomi chose to have the OS with them. Huawei also has a car, but they don't manufacture the car themselves. They partner with somebody else and they provide the computing unit and the software to that car. But the same experience translates from the Huawei mobile user to the car. The other brand, Geely, also has bought, I think, a smallest market share Android company called Mizu, which used to make their own phones. I don't know if anybody remembers the name, but Mizu, when they bought Mizu, they got all these people who were operating system guys who are now building the Flyme OS, which is the OS name for Geely's cars. Now, it's quite fascinating that everybody wants to build themselves, iterate. Who knows what happens next, but at least when you sit in the car, the experience is a wow. But the challenge with this is when you go to any of these shops where cars are displayed next to each other and sit in one car, sit in the next car, sit in the next car, you start thinking in the first world way. All these cars look the same. Okay, what is the great advantage of buying a Neo versus buying an Xpeng or versus buying a BYD or versus buying whatever? Then the whole concept in India, which is battery anxiety, how much range the car will give, we don't talk about all these things. Over there, it is given that you will have enough chargers, you will have enough range for the cars, you will be able to drive on good roads, everything will be working fine. So the basics are taken care of. Now the competition is, oh, this phone pairs with this car and I can use this car in this particular way. I can add the accessories in this car. It controls my washing machine at home. Some random features or user experiences have become far more important. So the market itself is evolving. The product market fit is itself evolving. We don't know where it is going to stagnate or where it is going to catch on to what sells. But clearly, the larger players like BYD have figured out something that works universally, and they're thinking more in terms of what auto OEMs have thought over a period of time. Another great advantage for EV companies globally has been the again because of Chinese economies of scale, the consistent drop in battery prices, where at one point battery the unit itself used to be 60% of the bill of materials of the car, has now gone to 35%, 30% in many cases. And we don't know how far it will go. But yeah, rest of the things have also now picked up in price. So sensors have become cheaper because again Chinese companies have scaled up capacity. The chips that we saw where only Nvidia or other people are designing it, now many more companies are designing their own chips which control the computing units or even the smaller chips that are there in the car. And when you drop the prices of these chips, and battery itself has dropped more than 90% in the last 10 years. So if you drop the prices of these items which go in the car, we clearly see a great advantage in terms of at least gross profit margin the companies can make, which is positive. Or in many better quality companies, also 20-25% gross profit margin you can earn by just selling an EV. So this is again a trend which is like we didn't start the fire. It is already there. And we just have to now make sure that we have to take advantage of this fire that is burning and make sure that we also have competing products, competing software systems, competing hardware systems when we are selling cars globally. One thing which people talk about the most is the push from the government and the central level and also at the decentralized level at different cities and different districts that they are in China. So there's of course competition for job creation. It's a very different system in China where they have made sure that each city will compete next to its city and make sure that jobs get created, and they will give cheap land, cheap power, whatever talent they can require. And there, I think the migration is not as easy as it is in our country. You have to earn the right to migrate somewhere and earn the local services by staying there over a period of time, paying taxes in some local area. So government's push has been from one side is to reduce emissions in cities, and that of course has happened. And of course we have read the headlines and seen all the negative news about Chinese cities under smog, and people are seeing AQI of 300 on a daily basis. But if you go there and stand in the city and breathe the air, it does not feel like it's a bad place to be. The AQI, I don't, if you don't want to trust the sensors, at least trust your nose that the air is good. I mean, you don't feel the same kind of news that you used to read 10, 12 years back about China being polluted. And from being the most polluted cities in the world to becoming close to the least polluted cities is a great achievement by whatever means they have done it. So the first push has been to make sure that people want to buy emission-free vehicles like EVs. Emission-free is under quotes. Emission happens somewhere else, but at least you have the cities which don't have the tailpipe emissions. Then you have licensing restrictions for buying the license plates for your ICE cars. So many major cities have stopped giving out licenses, and if you want to renew your license plate, then you have to pay or be get in the lottery or some auction, pay some exorbitant price to buy a ICE license plate. But you usually get a EV license plate if you want to get it. So some of these things are policy driven, incentive driven, trying to nudge people into one direction. And of course, when all the other factors I mentioned earlier are also there, it's a huge tailwind for the sector. It was like a perfect combination of events happening together and everything just clicked at the same time, and it creates some massive competition. Just the same way, exact same way it has happened in the smartphone ecosystem as well. And despite this, Chinese people still complain that they are not indigenous enough. So the chips that are manufactured in the put in the cars, only 10% of them are originating from China. The rest of the 90% have to be imported, mostly from Taiwan or Japan or Korea, South Korea, where Samsung and other companies manufacture these chips. So this is from Jan 25. So this is a latest news saying that okay, we need to improve our incentive structure or improve or create a better way for people to make chips in the country. And there are ways to do it. So of course, China has been bombarding people across the world, whatever talent they can find in chip designing, in software development, in all sorts of things. They have been trying to hire people from Germany, from America, from other auto ancillary companies, whoever they can get their hands on, to get them on land, learn from them what can be done, how can be improved. Basically, this is all part of R&D. All the expense you see here is going to go into R&D. And when Royal says it's 5%, 10%, 20% of the revenue is R&D, this is all where the money is going. There are other fun things in China. So imagine if in the Google Maps app, you suddenly see a countdown for the signal where you're stopped, and the red signal is counting down in front of you, and the same time in the Google Maps app. This is actually a feature which most apps have. Most of it, people think that it is from infrastructure collaboration with the Chinese local governments. It's not. It can be a GPS based algorithm also, but it adds a little bit of nice touch to you, and it is fairly accurate. I saw this in the driver who was taking us around. It was fairly accurate. It was 1 or 2 seconds delayed, but still you could see the signal counting down, and especially when you're all the way in the back and you cannot see the signal from the front, you can actually see the counting down, and you will have anticipation. You know when to release the brake and start your car. But interestingly, on every street corner or a pole, you will see all sorts of surveillance tools available. One can call them surveillance society, but you can also call them a society which is driven by adopting new technologies and infrastructure. Everything has a cost, and there is again a supply chain available within China to create all these sensors, which is also driving the cost of sensors for the cars. And the interesting thing is, your cars may not require as many sensors if your infrastructures, the roads, are smart. So what they're trying to do is create LiDAR sensors, put camera sensors, which will communicate eventually with the cars who have these capabilities to tap into these sensors, and they will learn about their environment. So they will know when to slow down, they will know when to accelerate, they will know when to maintain the flow of traffic. They can reroute the car also if it's autonomous in some way. So all these tools theoretically exist today in China, and theoretically even the car was there. The Xiaomi car was a theory at one point in time. It's on the street. So I don't know how much of it will actually be implemented. But if they can, I think everybody can, they can actually implement it. As coming to the end of the presentation, I think just to give you some reference points for some interesting data points. So of course, this One Device is a fantastic book which talks about the entire history of software development, user interface development, hardware development, manufacturing, and scaling in China. It's written by a journalist called Brian Merchant, called The One Device, and focuses only on the history of the iPhone. And there have been books written about the iPhone and the iOS and the Apple ecosystem before, but here he actually goes and talks to people who were working in working in Apple in the 80s, whose research papers were discovered by people who were working in 2000s, and they figured out this can also now work because we have computing power, we have screens and all those things. So it's quite fascinating to see the legacy of engineering and talent that Apple had nurtured and still nurtures to create the iPhone. And this is a very recent book, again an academic evaluation of the political history of China as to why it led to China becoming what it is today. The last 1/3 part of the book is more relevant to us analysts and business people. The rest of the book, 2/3 of the book, is basically their political history. And if you want to go into characters, individual life stories, then maybe you're interested in that part. But the last third is something I really like because it gives very practical points that they did, and without knowing how it will play out. They knew something will happen. Basically, when you listen to Lee Kuan Yew talk about Singapore's development, imagine doing that at the scale of China. And despite their corruption, despite all the incumbent things that go along with policy making and all the issues that people face, convincing people, and people will easily dismiss it, oh, they don't have a democracy, so how does it matter? But it doesn't matter. They executed it. People are benefited. The per capita income has gone up. Manufacturing base has been built over there. They are independent in so many technologies, manufacturing all sorts of things, right, from chemicals to basic stuff. And the air is good. I'm not promoting China too much, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned and observed if you want to study patterns as to what is changing in our country for the next 20 years. Maybe there are some lessons in these examples where we can learn from. Lastly, I think there's one guy who has been the most vocal champion for Chinese EVs. He's the CEO of Ford. And when I was in China at that time, there was a news headline in Chinese media where this interview was quoted, and he said that he has been driving the Xiaomi SU7 for 6 months and doesn't want to give the car back. He's a CEO of a American auto company. It's quite interesting how he talks about how China has evolved from business point of view. Sort of the points which Rohil and I mentioned. He gives a very nice macro context as to why Chinese OEMs do what they do. It's some of the points I mentioned here, but he's far more articulate about from the business side how they think about creating these ecosystems within their own things and how Western OEMs can benefit by partnering with them in many of these use cases. So, in conclusion, I think OEMs and investors in OEMs have nowhere to hide. The value chain capture has happened just like it has happened in smartphones, hence the title of the presentation. They have now figured out a way to deliver a superior software experience in the car as well as a superior hardware experience in terms of creating a good car. I mean, you can feel that the car is really nice by sitting in that car, the way it handles itself. I mean, going 0 to 100 was never in my mind in 2.8 seconds, but when you do it, you feel why not? The interesting part about constant iterations, if you don't see it happening in the OEMs that you track, if you don't see that improvements are visible in the products that they're selling, then you should question the motives of the particular company, whatever their constraints and reasons might be. But it's very, very important to put a product and take whatever reviews you get. But if a customer likes it, you don't know where that product market fit is going to lie in the future. So keep iterating, keep pushing. I think that's a good lesson to be learned from Chinese OEMs. We have also seen huge consolidation in Chinese OEMs, so that market may not be the right benchmark to even compare. So most of the parts of the world, consolidation has taken 100 years to happen. So now, after 100 years, every major country who has an automotive manufacturer, you will see they will have 4 or 5 big players and they have an umbrella of brands underneath them and they will run their fiefdoms in their own way. But that is happening in China today. So we'll see where it rests. But it's an interesting thing to keep observing. So some of the examples I gave of brands which I praised for what they were doing, let's see if they exist 10 years from now. This is again a very interesting part which I don't think many people talk about very proudly in India. That if you're creating new IP, every company we went into, and it's a normal entrance, it's a lobby. When our lobby, you will find an art piece or something or a car part or something. There you will find a wall of some Chinese scribbled certificates, and it's all patents that they have filed. There was one company whose entire lobby was filled with patent frames. I said, okay, interesting. They are innovating. They're advertising that they are innovating. Maybe that is for show for investors who walk into the lobby to see that, oh, look at the R&D budget is going somewhere. But it's interesting to talk about what you have built, talk about where it has been useful. That communication is lacking from many of the OEMs in India today. They talk about the products and other things. They talk about taxes. They talk about everything else far more liberally than they talk about what IP they are building. And this is not just in the hardware and software chips, but also in battery technology. So who knew LFP battery will become a standard in the world? But Chinese provided the base for scaling that capacity, and they provided that cheap battery, which also has a less fire hazard as compared to the nickel battery. And maybe they will also pioneer the solid state battery going ahead, because many companies we saw there were working on solid state battery which are used in smaller use cases like drones or missiles, wherever you need smaller compact batteries which don't have the same fire risk. And of course, these things will continue. The huge R&D investments they are doing, which are visible in the financial statements. You choose to not believe the numbers or counting, it's fine, but these numbers are happening and we know the sources of why these numbers are increasing over a period of time. But there is some hope. I'm not saying it's going to be all gloom and doom for OEMs all over the world. What is interesting is many Western OEMs are now partnering with Chinese companies, saying that, okay, we will scrap our platforms because they're not going anywhere. They're not able to convince customers or even manage to keep our costs down. They are forming JVs with Chinese EV companies for two reasons. One is not revealed so much. In my opinion, it is because the Chinese OEMs want to survive. So they need funding from somewhere. And the Western OEMs want technology which is already working on the street. So why reinvent the wheel of both capital raising as well as the car development? It's a win-win for both companies, and there are many JVs we can see from all the Western OEMs who are working with Chinese companies to adopt their EV platforms. There's also interestingly local capacity expansion in South America, in Europe, even in India. We're expanding capacity quite rapidly. So wherever there is an automotive market, they've also realized that local capacity expansion is a great way to compete with anybody else. And That way, it will give you a chance to reiterate even the manufacturing process as to how to efficiently make these cars. So again, collaborative development happened even with Western companies. So they also work with the same chip designing companies, the same auto ancillaries, same battery companies to come up with custom kits for their vehicles instead of buying something generic off the shelf. So even if you fail and the platform awareness of creating a platform for your own product, you still can differentiate as a brand. So you don't have to worry that, oh, this operating system is not mine. So Oppo does not have its own operating system. It's a modified Android OS. But Oppo is a phone people buy globally. Doesn't matter. You lose the platform war, you can win the brand war. You can survive either way. If you win the platform and the brand war, nothing like it. But this is survival for you and growth for you, even if you have a good brand to sell. The most interesting combination of things, which is I don't see it in any annual report, I don't see how to even compute these things, is the dynamics of the cost of technology absorption, the capital cost as well as operating cost on a per product basis, the pricing of the end vehicle, which also includes the actual price we pay, including taxes for whatever size of vehicle, whatever fuel source of vehicle you buy, and kind of after sales support you provide for that particular thing. I think the combination of this is a deadly killer app for most of these existing incumbent players because they have decades of experience of running these things. So imagine if you put this giant computing chip in your car and a car is fully run on that chip and something goes wrong with that chip. Do you really have the after sales capability to diagnose this locally or remotely or whatever is required for that car to run? Big question mark. Nobody knows. Even in China, nobody knows. So if you see the failure rates of some of these Chinese companies, so JD Power, which does the reliability study for global cars, they also do for Chinese cars. They so far rank very high because there has not been a long history of operation. But the older brands are actually in the lower end of the spectrum. We can assume because the cars at that time were technologically less superior than they are today. But it's remains to be seen the after sales and the overall pricing and the cost of technology absorption, how it impacts the ROC over a period of time. I wanted to remember most companies make single digit ROCs also, which is quite surprising. And we don't know the quality of R&D and infrastructure we have here. So if you have bad roads, does the ADAS work well? We don't know. We haven't figured out all these questions yet. So maybe it may be happening. The future is happening somewhere, but they have the infrastructure to take advantage of it. We may be a little bit further behind, but whatever works here still works here. It's not something that companies are making losses all of a sudden. Tariffs, of course, really help. You can't suddenly pick up a car from China and sell in India and not face any tariffs. It's 100% tariff for fully built vehicles, which you import from abroad. But the more interesting thing I find is because of the geopolitics and the trust issues between different technology companies and different countries, some technology sovereignty eventually will come. So you may, if you are America, you may want American cars to have autonomous features in America and not want to adopt the Chinese softwares. Just like Tesla could not sell full self-driving in China for the longest period of time, till last year. They could not sell full self-driving kit, where the rest of the world, people were enjoying the FSD technology, the autonomous driving capability. So technology sovereignty might be in our favor if we can come up with a platform and technology of our own for Indian conditions, and it works just fine. Which we have not done so far in the smartphone case. We have adopted all Western technology so far. And of course, don't just sell for India, sell for the world. If you have the land, if you have the capacity, the labor, we can manufacture at scale. You sell it to the world. You don't have to sell it just for your own audience. Thank you. So the auto questions, I think Royal is a better person to take. I will take the tech questions if you have any.
Hi, thank you, Ronak and Roy, for the BBC presentation.
Thank you.
My question is this whole process of moving from oil to EV was basically for eco-friendly emissions. And the technology part, aside, keeping it aside, do you feel like the hydrogen can be a disruption over a period of time?
So far, we don't see too many hydrogen cars or hydrogen fuel stations. So I'm actually in the mature stage. I want the technology to mature and then see if it has done well or not. So far, EVs have done well. So far, oil, of course, has done well for the longest period of time. We'll see where hydrogen lands. I don't have an opinion about why it should work, should not work. It has not worked in places where people can afford to buy a hydrogen car and know the benefits of hydrogen's fuel economy and everything. But it has not been able to scale just yet. So we don't know where the business model innovation has to happen, where the supply chain innovation has to happen for hydrogen to pick up as a better fuel source. But I think that is still far early as compared to what other things we were discussing. So even in China, they will be experimenting with hydrogen, and you will read news about it. But nothing exciting in terms of seeing every second truck is a hydrogen truck or a second car is a hydrogen car. But actually today, every second car is an EV in China.
So my question is, what is the percentage of hybrid that is on roads in China? Is it greater number than India or
Much larger,
all electric?
much larger number. So hybrid. So out of the numbers, the NEV we saw, so if 5 lakh cars were sold by BYD in the month of December, out of that 80% will be hybrid cars, the plug-in hybrid cars, not the hybrid cars we have in India where they power themselves through the kinetic energy, but these are hybrid cars which you can plug in with a socket and charge them.
Okay, so it's different from what hybrid that we have right now.
So there are different qualities. There is a mild hybrid, a strong hybrid, and a plug-in hybrid. So we have the mild and the strong. We don't have plug-in hybrids yet.
So just for the understanding, so whatever hybrid car being sold in India, they said that when you are in the lower gear ratio, it will use an electric battery. The moment you go on highway or higher gear ratios, it will use the fossil fuel. Okay. So because there is a tax problem, many people can't buy it. But it gives a lot of soothing in the mind because you don't have range anxiety. Yes. So what kind of hybrid is there in China?
Similarly, there are cars which can run on a 1,000 kilometer run on a single fuel tank because they have battery plus petrol. So you can do that even in India. So there have been videos on YouTube by the Honda's strong hybrid. Somebody did Bangalore to Mumbai, 1,000 kilometers. Someone did with Toyota Hyryder, Delhi to Mumbai on a single fuel tank. So it's possible in India also, but the conditions have to be managed. You cannot expect it to happen every time. But the technology is there. It's not technology not available. It's just that, like you said, some local taxation and other issues will cause a lot of people not to buy it because of the sticker shock that they will get when they purchase the car. And of course, that will stifle the technology adoption also to some extent. The hybrid cars we see today might have older technology, which is obsolete in some parts of the world, but we are getting it because it's still available and cheap to manufacture. You have a view on that?
No, that's I think. And what is the battery life for pure electric versus hybrid?
That's the most debated question today because we don't know because we haven't seen a full cycle of cars yet, right?
Yeah, no. So none of the electric models have been around for so long that they've gone through an entire cycle for the battery. But increasingly, even in India, you will see most of the OEMs that are doing so. Even on the two-wheeler side, they're starting to increase the warranty lives, or even as a range in terms of the number of kilometers, also not just the years. So they're starting to increase that because they're seeing when the deterioration in the battery health is not as significant, so they can continue running for a really long period of time.
Thank you. We'll take one last question from the room and one question from Zoom if they have, and we can discuss it afterwards as well. Nothing on Zoom. Oh, one question. You have one question? Okay, sorry.
How do you see EV bikes and cars growth in India? Who will win? Who will ever have to win?
So EV bikes and cars, right to win in India. That is, I think, Royal's domain.
EV bikes and cars. So bikes again right now, it's been largely the scooters that are found in India. Again, this is very dependent. It's not that easy to scale. BYD also has done a fabulous job in China with I think about 1.7 million EVs, pure EVs that they sold in the entirety of last year. And to do it at that scale, ensuring the after-sales service, which Ronak mentioned, there are a lot of factors that go into the longer-term success of a vehicle. So yeah, even when he mentioned, so from 350 OEMs coming down to 57 today, and maybe 10 tomorrow, those 10 can be entirely different if they don't iterate and innovate, considering how quickly the technology is changing today. So these things really matter. So I think what more important is to look at an OEM from a perspective as what is their time to market? Are they iterating enough, learning enough from their mistakes, and have the courage to make the mistakes also? Of course, with this, the balance sheet strength has to be there. But these are important things to look at when you're looking at an OEM. And are you adapting to the local conditions, be it India or globally? So it's not easy to just pick up a good quality product from the global markets and bring it to India. You have to really adapt it. So I think this goes back in the ICE history also. If you see one of the recent autocar podcasts for Osamu Suzuki, probably Indian four-wheeler industry would not have been where it is today if Suzuki had not adapted the car to what the Maruti 800 to what India really required, rather than just bringing the low-volume, low-cost car to India and selling it as it is. So yeah, I think it's a very subjective answer. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that unless you have something to add.
No, that's it. Thank you, Rohil. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And we both are here, so we can chat about other things also. Thank you so much.
Whenever things got rough, I always remember what my father used to say.
Running a business does test a man, my son. There are ups and downs, glorious highs, and sometimes a low that leaves you feeling defeated.
The character of a man and the character of a business are not very different, are they?
Yes. But when the chips are down, we must stand up, dust ourselves off, and motor on.
Volatility. It's a funny thing. It makes you question yourself and wonder if you've made all the right decisions.
Sure, you can question some of your decisions, but stay steadfast on your goals.
Dad always said, there are no shortcuts and no quick profits.
There are no free lunches, are there? There is only one
Right way.
At PPFAS, we think like Rahul and his father. That volatility is a fact of running a business. And buying equity shares is like owning a part of that business. We use value investing principles to manage your money. This means we invest in the right businesses at reasonable prices and for a longer term.
PPFAS Mutual Fund. There's only one right way. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.